Hey everybody, we're going to go ahead and work through a few problems here to help you with any questions you have on how to factor a trinomial that will then factor into 3 binomials instead of just 2 binomials. So this will be for questions that aren't quadratics but are instead other polynomials. Normally they're going to be quartic questions that will then be used the box method and grouping. So I'm going to show you both ways. You don't need to use both in one question, but I'm going to show you one of the box and one of grouping. They are the same thing. You may also have heard of the box method as called the AC method. It is the exact same process. So looking at this first one here, we have 5x to the fourth minus 19x squared minus 4. And the first thing we're always going to do after making sure that we're in standard form is to look for a greatest common factor. So if I'm looking between my 5, my 19, and my 4, there is no number other than 1 that can divide into all 3 of these. So this is going to be A, B, and C. Now the first thing I'm going to do is make a multiply add chart. You might have seen this as an X as well in some other videos or in your own class. And we're going to use a T chart instead just because I don't like the X. So our multiply column will be A times C. That's why it's called the AC method. 5 times negative 4 is negative 20. And then we're going to add to the middle term of negative 19. So we are looking for a pair of numbers that will multiply to make negative 20. So I'm just going to write down all the pairs that make 20 in general. That'd be 1 times 20, 2 times 10, and 4 times 5. And now we're looking to multiply to a negative 20. The only way to multiply to a negative number is to multiply a positive times a negative. So one of our numbers will need to be negative. The way to figure out which one instead of just having to guess and check is looking over here at my add column. I want to add to a negative 19. To add 2 numbers together that have different signs and make them end up as a negative term means my bigger number when adding needs to be the negative one. So I'm going to make my larger number here negative, and then I'm just going to add them all together. So 1 plus negative 20 is negative 19. So this is the pair that matches our question. I'm just going to finish off our table so it's not half done. 2 plus negative 10 is negative 8. And then 4 plus negative 5 is negative 1. Now, here, we're going to go ahead and do the box for this one. So the way you do the box method is you're going to draw a box. And remember, it's going to be in order A, B, B, C. So I'm going to go ahead and put my A term first. And then these 2 middle boxes, the diagonal ones, are going to add up to B, which is a negative 19x squared. And the 2 numbers I'm going to use for that, according to my multiply add chart, are 1x squared and negative 20x squared. And then my C term is a negative 4. Now from here, I'm going to take the greatest common factor of each column and each row. So here are my 2 columns. Between 5x to the fourth and negative 20x squared, they can be divided by a 5x squared is our greatest common factor there. Our next column, 1x squared and negative 4, only have a 1 as a common factor. And then this box here is a positive, so that decides that this is also a positive. Now we're going to go horizontally. This direction here, we have a 5x to the fourth and a 1x squared. They have an x squared in common. And then our last one here, we have a 20x squared and a 4. They have a 4 in common. This is a negative, so I put this negative sign out here. And so far, my answer is 5x squared plus 1 times x squared minus 4. And then we would ask ourselves, could this be simplified any farther? Is there anything I could do to either of my binomials to make them into simpler terms or into an extra factor? Our first one here is 5x squared plus 1. There are no cubes here to do a sum of cubes, and it's not a difference, so it couldn't be a difference of squares. And there's no greatest common factor other than 1, so this could not be simplified. Our second one, though, x squared minus 4, is a difference of 2 squares. I'm going to scoot this answer over here to the side, just so we have a little more room to write. There we go. Now I'm looking over here. I know this can be simplified or can be factored farther into 2 factors. So I have my x squared minus 4. This could also be written as x squared minus 2 squared because this is a difference of 2 squares. Now what we do, remember, is if we have a squared minus b squared, that can be factored into a plus b times a minus b. I'm going to write that up here just in case you need to see it. Now, because I'm already in this format of a squared minus b squared, I can just factor into this. So instead of it being x squared minus 2 squared, it's going to be x plus 2 times x minus 2. And I'm going to bring down this original factor that cannot be factored any farther, and this would be our answer. Okay, let's go ahead and look at example number 2. If you want to pause and try this one on your own, I think that'd be a great idea. For this one, I'm going to do a grouping question. So same process technically as our multiply add chart in our box, but just looks a little different. When we're going through grouping, we'll take out our greatest common factor twice. That's kind of the process of grouping. And that's the same thing as doing the greatest common factor here and the greatest common factor here. So looking at this question, first thing I'm going to do is see if I have a greatest common factor not equal to 1. So the thing I like to do is just look for our smallest term. Our smallest term is 8. So the biggest our GCF could be is 8. And I'm going to write down the factors of 8. So 1, 2, 4, and 8 are the factors of 8. 8 will go into 16, but it cannot go into 28, so that wouldn't work. 4 will go into 8, it'll go into 28, and it'll go into 16. So that's going to be our greatest factor we have in common here. So first thing we're going to do is just factor out that 4. 16x to the 4th divided by 4 is 4x to the 4th. 28x squared divided by 4 is 7x squared. And negative 8 divided by 4 is negative 2. Now I know that I've already factored out my GCF. I don't need to use that again until the answer. Now I'm going to look inside my parentheses here at my new trinomial. This is the factor I'm now going to focus on trying to factor. Because it's a trinomial, I'm going to label it ABC. It's in standard form. And what we're going to do is make a multiply add chart. So I'm going to multiply to a times c. Negative 2 times 4 is negative 8. And then I'm going to add to b, which is positive 7. So I'm going to look for all the pairs of numbers that could multiply to make a negative 8. I could have 1 times 8, or I could have 2 times 4. Those are my only options. If it needs to multiply to a negative 8, one of these numbers needs to be negative. And I can decide without guessing and checking which one by looking at what it's going to add to. If it adds to a positive number, that means the bigger number needs to be positive. So my smaller number would be negative. We'll go ahead and label that. And I'm just going to add them together and see which one adds to 7. So negative 1 plus 8 is positive 7. So this is the pair we're going to use. And I'm just going to finish off our table here. Negative 2 plus 4 is 2. So we're going to use this one. Now, instead of using the box this time, I'm going to show you with grouping. Remember, the way we work a grouping question with a trinomial is we write it out just like we would the box A, B, B, C. So our A term is 4x to the 4th. Instead of writing 7x squared, we're going to break it into the two numbers from our multiply add chart. So negative 1x squared and positive 8x squared. And then C is minus 2. Now, if you wanted to do the box instead, this is the box. This is what the box would look like. We just write it like this instead for grouping. And now for a grouping question, we're going to group the first two and the second two. Remember, the way grouping works, we find the greatest common factor of each pair of numbers, and then we take it out. So positive 4x to the 4th minus 1x squared has an x squared in common. 8x squared minus 2 has a 2 in common. Let me go ahead and divide this out. So I'm putting my x squared here. To put my parentheses, I'm going to divide out my GCF. 4x to the 4th divided by x squared is 4x squared. Negative 1x squared divided by x squared is negative 1. So in our parentheses here, we have 4x squared minus 1. For this to work out, we want this to have a matching factor on the other side. So I'm going to take out my 2. This is a positive 2. 8x squared divided by 2, my brain went too fast, is 4x squared. 2 divided by 2 is 1, so minus 1. Notice these match. Here's our new matching factor. And now what I'm going to do is take out my matching factor because it's our new greatest common factor. So I'm going to put this out front. I'm going to write down what I have left. So I have an x squared and a plus 2. And then don't forget that GCF from the beginning is going to come down as well. So this is where we're at so far. Now we ask ourselves, could these be simplified farther? Our first one here, this is a difference of squares because these are squared numbers, a subtraction sign, and this is also a squared number. So our first one could be simplified. Our second one cannot because 2 is not a squared number or a cubed number. So I'm going to look at this first one here. I have 4x squared minus 1. If I want to do a difference of two squares, I need to write all my terms as squared numbers. So instead of writing 4x squared, I could say 2 squared x squared. Instead of writing 1, I could say 1 squared because 1 squared is 1. Now this looks similar to a squared minus b squared, which we wrote up here. Doop. And can be factored into a plus b times a minus b. So to do that, I need to have a and b. So here I have a. If a squared is 2 squared, then a is 2. If a squared is x squared, then a is x. Here for b, if b squared is 1 squared, then b is 1. So now I could just write a plus b times a minus b. And then don't forget our other factors. We still have this one here, x squared plus 2. And then don't forget our greatest common factor from the very beginning, which was a 4. And this is our answer. I hope this helps. Good luck.